Here in an episode of Chordplay, and this is the chords of Steve Miller Band. And when I was putting this lesson together, I was trying to find something appropriate for the holiday tomorrow, with the 4th of July. And I kept coming back to Steve Miller. And I had some other ideas, but I kept coming back to Steve Miller, and I guess it must just be that great, classic American rock and roll. But the Steve Miller Band formed in San Francisco, California in 1966, and were originally a psychedelic rock band, which is very different than what most people think of when they think of the Steve Miller Band in the 70s. But Steve Miller Band in the 60s was very erratic and kind of random, lots of this kind of funky organ going on, and very experimental, and early Steve Miller, actually he was working with Glenn Johns, the famous producer, also Boz Scaggs, co-wrote some songs, played a little bit of guitar, and collaborated with Steve Miller. Paul McCartney randomly appears on an early, Steve Miller Band album. I think the entire Beatles were actually supposed to appear on that album, but then there was an argument of some sort, and it just, ended up being Paul McCartney. But it's really interesting. There's all these little factoids about Steve Miller, and he really is just kind of an average guy. He's not a virtuoso. He's not Malmsteen or somebody. He's just a great songwriter, frontman, guitarist, singer. Obviously, very respected. And his music's played, all day, every day on classic rock radio, to this day. And one little factoid that I found doing the research for this lesson that I didn't know, Les Paul was actually Steve Miller's godfather. And I guess like Steve Miller's parents were friends with Les Paul and Mary Ford. And then I guess whenever Steve was born, he became their godfather. And then eventually when Steve was younger and started playing guitar, I read a story where Les Paul said, hey, keep it up, kid. Maybe you can do something with that, one day. And lo and behold, he sure did. He's become a legend of classic rock for sure. And even though the examples in this lesson aren't really hard to play, it really is a good lesson in just structured, well-written, rock guitar or rock music. And even though shredding and these virtuoso techniques are really impressive, at the end of the day, a well-written song is what it's all about. That's what people remember. A melody or a groove or, maybe the lyrics or something. And even though the flashy showmanship is really cool, especially for guitarists, but for the average person, they want to hear a song. They want to hear something they can whistle or hum or sing along with. And Steve Miller's perfect for that. So anyway, here we go. The opening, that's Jungle Love from the Book of Dreams album. And I know when I was a teenager and I first tackled that song, I just grabbed my guitar and attempted to play it in standard tuning. And it just never sounded right. Now the recording is a little bit out of tune. You actually have to tune to the song if you want to play along. But it just never sounded right, in standard tuning. And then fast forward a few years, I did find a songbook, and I was looking through the transcription, and I saw it was written in open A. And I thought, well, hey, maybe that's why it never really sounded right when I was younger. And then I tuned that way and tuned up to the song, and lo and behold, it sounded just like it. So it's a little different, and we're in open A tuning, and that's going to be E, A, E, A, C sharp, E. So we're really just, retuning 3 of the strings. Your D, your G, and your B are all going up a whole step. And that would give you open A. Like that. And then you've got this. You're kind of starting with this open position single note line, but it does involve some open strings. that that single note line, then just slide into this double stop there on the D and the G on the 9th fret. Let that sustain for a minute. And then you're grabbing this, so it's just a 1-finger bar there on the A, D, and G, but tuned this way, that's going to function as E. And then you're basically grabbing the 7th fret there and then adding this kind of 70s, you know, inversion, or that little slash chord right there. But that's going to be an A in this tuning. So you're doing this, and then go back to the 5th fret right there in bar, and that's a D. And then you hear this descending pattern. And that part just never sounded right in standard tuning. But then when you tune to open A, magically it sounds just like the album. Then you got this little single note line. Go back to that E. And then you basically hear him play the 5th fret on the A, the 5th fret on the D, and he bends it. Like that. And the second time he's really just separating the double stops there. And then start it all over again. Then you end with, it basically goes in the chorus right there. A really cool song. Next is Living in the USA, which is from the album Sailor, and this is in standard tuning, and something like this. One chord right there in the beginning, and that single note riff, you know, comes in. But that's going to be an A7 sharp 9. You know, think of the Hendrix chord, right? Purple Haze, and, you know, Spanish Castle Magic, and some of those songs. So A7 sharp 9, and there are, you know, 3 different varieties of these chords, and there's other ways you can play them too. But 3 of the most common, you know, Hendrix chord, you know, fingerings. So you got this one, which there's A7 sharp 9 right there. You know, basically grabbing this A, C sharp, this G, and then C natural right there. But you're basically playing a sharp 9. So that's a B sharp right there, which most people don't want to think of that as B sharp. But that's what that is, because you already have C sharp, and then that's the 9th, which is B. Not to get too involved right there, but there's, you know, A7 sharp 9 here. You can also play the more familiar kind of Hendrix shape in the key of A right here. But we're doing it down on the bottom strings down here. Same notes, you know, same chord, just a different fingering down here. And you also hear that real funky kind of 60s organ, you know, with that chord. And then you hear that single note riff. But I just wanted to include this because that A7 sharp 9 is kind of unusual, you know, with that low E root right there. Next to the title track from Fly Like an Eagle, with the song Fly Like an Eagle, and it's something like this. starting with these little partial chords. So you're kind of moving between this E, F sharp, grabbing that A, and then moving back to this partial C. But it's actually in the key of A minor, so that's like a little piece of A minor 7 right there. You know, if you think of the root, you know, with it. And that's a tricky riff. You could actually play with using all your fingers, which I know Steve didn't play it this way, but you could do it this way. Which you're not really using all your fingers there, but I'm using my pinky and I'm kind of, you know, fanning my hand out. And that does make it a little bit easier, even though now you're dealing with a stretch. If you don't like doing all those shifts, you could actually play it like that. Or you could do it this way with the shifts. Part really is just a composite of everything going on. There's a lot going on: the bass, the guitar, the vocals, and I really just over the years, I guess I made my own way of playing that, you know, by myself like this. And that's basically the vocals right there, you know, that little harmonized vocal part. Songs where you can kind of emulate, you know, the entire tune, but just with one guitar. Up next is Rockin' Me, which is also from Fly Like an Eagle, and there's just something about the song. It's very simple, but I know when I hear it in the car on the radio, I turn it up, I probably end up driving a little bit faster. There's just something about it, you know, great tune. We're basically hitting this A into a B power chord, and then B to E, back to that B, so that opening part, and then you hear this little hammer-on kind of partial chord right there. It's like an E over G sharp. You know, think of Hendrix, but Steve's basically doing a hammer-on right there. Go back to that B power chord. This kind of funky single note riff. And it goes in the verse. You know, classic tune. Okay, now for some obscure Steve Miller Band. So this is the song Cal Cal Calculator, which is from Brave New World. This is some of the early stuff, you know, back when Glenn Johns was producing. And it's this really simple riff. It's really just a 3-chord progression that's outlined. But it's super funky and it's got this soul R&B kind of groove to it. Really cool, like this. Something like that. So it kind of starts and we're flirting with G7. So you can kind of think of it like G7 and it's moving to F. And then we're making our way to C. But he's not playing it like that. Which that would be really generic if that's what he played. But instead of doing that, he's playing with the octaves and he's doing... and kind of moving moving back and grabbing that F, I'm also using my thumb there, almost like Hendrix. And then you're going to basically slide this D into E, and then grab that single C note right there and give it some vibrato. He almost kind of overplays that note like the first time. And then you hear this. So you're kind of playing with like a C over E, and you're also kind of hammering on this double stop. Like that. Very Hendrixy in there for sure. A sucker for those Hendrix, kind of syrupy R&B lines, so cool. The last example is another obscure Steve Miller Band song. This is Sacrifice from the Book of Dreams album, and there's something weird happening with the tuning, because when you listen to the song, you can distinctly hear he's playing harmonics, against bass notes, which technically forms chords, but it's not in the key of E. It actually sounds like it's in the key of F. So I've seen, transcriptions with a capo on the first fret. I've also seen transcriptions just, in regular standard tuning. But you can definitely hear it when you try to play with the album. Everything's up, a half step, if you're thinking of the key of E. So you could put a capo, on the first fret if you wanted to. But since it's only a half step, I just raised my guitar's tuning. So I'm actually tuned up a half step. So now my low E is an F. But it's going to sound just like the album, like this. Big fan of harmonics. Of course, like my first published book was all about harmonics, with Hal Leonard and Van Halen and, all these influences with harmonics. I'm a sucker for when guitarists use harmonics like that in a creative way and maybe imply, a chord progression or some chords. And it's really interesting. So with that part, this 12th fret harmonic there on the D, G, and B strings, you're hitting harmonics, but you're basically implying a chord. And you could think of that like a G major triad. The same notes. You've got D, G, and B. And then over that E, that's technically going to be an E minor 7, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Let's just keep it simple and just think of basic, major triads there. But there's G. When you hit that 7th fret right there, that's basically implying, D major triad. And then the 5th fret is really just an octave of the 12th, and that's going to be G major, but an octave higher than what we had earlier. So it's really interesting that, pattern of harmonics really does outline chords. Really unusual and different, and it's just something to think about, when you start playing or maybe writing, some guitar parts like that. You can do some really cool things using harmonics like that. And then you hear it move to A. Basically A major to a D over A, and a little piece, it's like an A9, I guess you could think of it that way, and then back to that D over A. This episode of Chordplay with the chords of Steve Miller Band, and definitely Steve Miller Band and Steve Miller himself. I mean, it's just, he's a legend of rock music, American rock music, and definitely one of the most respected and popular musicians from the 70s, and he's still active. I think he's actually going on tour, I think later this year. So that's amazing. He's been around so long. People know his songs. The Joker and Abracadabra and all these famous songs, Jet Airliner, Rockin' Me, and some of these songs we looked at. But definitely there's something to be said about well-crafted rock music. It doesn't have to be hard to play. You don't have to shred arpeggios and all that stuff to write a good song. It's something memorable, or maybe something that's going to be played on the radio, or people are going to request and sing along or whatever. And definitely, some of this music's just timeless. And when you hear it on the radio, or you hear a band playing it, or it's in a movie or a commercial or something, it stops you and you're like, hey, I like this song. It's a classic. And Steve Miller definitely falls in that category. A lot of his songs are just eternally rock and roll classics. So have a great 4th of July. Leave some feedback and comments, and please subscribe to Learning Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.